Good afternoon and welcome to this online seminar. My name is Pijl. I'm the scientific coordinator of the Florence School of Banking and Finance, and it's a real pleasure for me to welcome you today to today's online seminar on Decrypting Sustainable Finance, which is held in cooperation with the Florence School of Regulation. We have the chance today of being in the company of top experts in the booming field of sustainability, so it is a real honor for me to welcome our lead speaker of today, Professor Dirk Schoenmaker from Erasmus University Rotterdam, and our discussant, Kinanya Pijl from the EY in its law department, as well as our world citizen, Jean-Michel Glachant, who is already on screen, also from the European University Institute. Dirk, Kinanya, Jean-Michel, thank you all for being with us today. And many thanks to my colleague Jan, who has prepared the seminar and is managing our online platform as we speak. So before telling you more about our audience, I would like to inform you first about our school's upcoming activities, as I'm sure that some will be of interest to you or to your colleagues. You will know by now that the Florence School of Banking and Finance, FBF in short, is a non-national training platform which is part of the European University Institute. The European University Institute is a very distinctive place. It is a public intergovernmental research and education institute which boasts an international community of more than 60 nationalities. The UI offers doctoral and postdoctoral as well as executive education programs in economics, law, political science, and history. Our school is a recent program of the UI. It has a diversity of policy debate and training activities, meaning that our online seminars are only one of many activities that we run. On the 25th of April, for example, we'll host our annual conference on the European financial infrastructure in the face of new challenges, which will look at extraterritorial sanctions relating to the payment system. It will look at debt restructuring, as well as the creation of a European safe asset. There are still seats available remaining, so please do not hesitate to look up our website and register if you wish to. On the training side of things, you can see on the slide that our school has been training more than 2,100 participants coming from 68 countries and a variety of organizations since the school's creation in early 2016. Over the next month, we'll be hosting several residential courses, including a course on financial market infrastructure, which will focus on CCPs. That's going to be with Professor Thorsten Köppel from Queen's University. It will be held on 20 to 22 of May, and there will be also practitioners part of the course. We'll then in June have a course on liquidity, price discovery, and market design. That will be with Thierry Foucault from HEC Paris on the 4th and the 5th of June. And lastly, we'll have a course on the economics of insurance markets with Ralph Kojen from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. That will be from the 24th to the 26th of June. But these are only a few of our upcoming training activities. So more details can be found on our website. Two last things of information. Let me flag to you first that next week, our colleagues from the UI School of Transnational Governance and from the Florence School of Regulation and Climate will host an executive training course on climate finance. And very lastly, please mark your diary for the 13th of April at 1 p.m. when we'll have our next online seminar on digital money with Professor Thorsten Köppel. Right, so I think it's time to thank you for your patience, to introduce you to one another. So since you don't see each other in that situation, let me do the presentations. So you are today around 120 participants connected today, following us from almost everywhere in Europe and from several other continents. As you can see on the map, 49 nationalities are represented. We're very glad about this. We're also very happy to count on several participants, as always, from the European Central Bank and the European Commission, but I must say that this time they've been outnumbered by the participants of the European Securities Market Authority. But jokes apart, let me welcome all the other participants from the diversity of organizations which are listed and not listed here. In terms of gender, we have a majority of women today. We have 59% of women, 41% who are men. You have, on average, about 8 years of professional experience. 49% of you are trained economists, 23% are lawyers, and 13% have a training in business. Lastly, 68% of you have a master's degree, while 19% of you have a PhD and 13% have a bachelor degree. So I will stop my remarks here and will hand over to the moderator of this digital event, Professor Jean-Michel Glachant. Jean-Michel is the director of the Florence School of Regulation here at the UI. The FSR is one of the most vibrant and dynamic programs of the UI. And Jean-Michel is also the holder of the Loyola de Palacio chair. So thank you to all of you. Jean-Michel, the floor is yours. You know the format of the event, and I saw that Dirk has joined us, so good morning.
Ladies, gentlemen, like many of you, if not all, I was fascinated by the wording, sustainable finance, while I know nothing about it. I was seeing it from my chair, which is energy and climate, and I was thinking, well, of course, there is a lot of sustainability issues in the area of energy and finance, energy and climate. And you know climate change, Céline, you know that we are not on track for the Paris Agreement's goal, but you may also know that recently in the 3 past decades in Germany and England, we, the humans, did kill 60 to 70% of all insects. So the frogs and the birds themselves are also disappearing in the same numbers because they have no food to eat. You may also notice that a recent article in the European Heart Journal said that we have to reevaluate the number of humans killed by air pollution. It's around 8 million every year, 2.5 million only in China, and likely 800,000 in European Union. And also numbers that I'm finding really fascinating. I did discover this morning that Aramco, the Saudi oil company, is making as net revenue $110 billion a year. I did see also that one of the most known sovereign fund in the foreign oil country, Norway, around 1,000 billion US dollar, is now refusing, of course, I will say, to finance any coal, but also now starting to stop financing exploration for oil and gas. And I did notice last week another number I'm finding very interesting, an alliance of progressive companies looking at decarbonizing the heavy industry, cement, steel, maritime traffic, etc. This alliance says, oh, we think that we can fully decarbonize heavy industry around 2040 for only 0.5% of GDP. Then I did look at my usual numbers for GDP. If it is GDP today, 0.5% makes 425 billion US dollar a year. If it is GDP in 2040, calculated with PPA, it's 1,250 billion US dollar. Where is this money coming from? But when looking at the book of Dirk Schoenmaker, I did see that I was wrong. All of this is part of climate. Sorry, again, you see that I'm really energy and climate. All of this is part of sustainable finance, but not only, also humans, also societies, also inequalities, and also how to organize this, what is the governance, the appropriate governance to make work sustainability for humans, for the planet, for the animals. And I did find the book of Dirk very interesting, Principles of Sustainable Finance at Oxford University Press. Dirk had also a fantastic CV. He did work for the Dutch Minister of Finance, he did work for the Bank of England, and he's a consultant for IMF, OECD, and European Commission. So we will learn a lot from Dirk, and now I'm giving the floor to Dirk, and after the Dirk's presentation, we will get somebody from REY commenting the Dirk's insights. Dirk, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jean-Michel, for a nice introduction, and welcome to all the participants of this webinar. So my name is Dirk Schoenmaker. I'm a professor at the Rotterdam School of Management at Erasmus and teaching and doing research on sustainable finance, which is a new field, but growing extremely fast. So I'm very happy to share my thoughts with you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. First the discussion and also to your questions, so please ask them. But I will start with a question for you. So, when we look at sustainable finance, what is the aim of sustainable finance? A, to make the financial system sustainable, to promote sustainable business practices, or to accelerate the transition to a sustainable economy. So make your choice. Yeah. I think most of you have voted by now, and if you look at the votes, clearly everybody's voting in favor of C, and yes, A and B are, I would say, intermediate objectives, but the ultimate goal is to really to accelerate the transition to a sustainable economy, and exactly looking at the issues Jean-Michel was already introducing. So A and B are really intermediate, and C is the final aim. So let's continue. So what I would like to do this afternoon with you is to, I always call it the journey, the sustainability journey. So first, why? What are the challenges? Second, what is it about? It is not about the financial system, but it is really about what is happening in the real economy with the companies. And then number 3 is how can finance stimulate sustainable companies? And finally, what is the transition to the sustainable economy? And if you go home this afternoon and people would ask you, what have you done? What have you learned? Then the key message is that we have to move from maximizing only profit, really going to maximizing integrated value, which is profit, the financial side, social value, and environmental value, and I call that integrated value. I will introduce that later. So, some of you may be familiar with the Planetary boundaries framework. That's coming from Science, a team from Stockholm, and it shows 9 planetary boundaries. Of course, climate change is really important and at the top, but as discussed already, biodiversity is also quite important, and there are land systemic change, freshwater use, biochemical flows, basically too much use of fertilizer, the ocean, the atmosphere, the ozone layer, and new things we don't know yet. And green means you are in the safe circle, yellow you are trespassing in uncertain boundary, and red you're really in the danger zone. So for climate change we are in the yellow zone, and if we go to the red zone, then we have the 2/3 possibility that we have to 2 degrees global warming. But then it is too late. So the precautionary principle is telling you should stay within the green circle, and then with quite a few, like biodiversity, biochemical flows, but also with climate change, we are already too far out. The main message from this one, there is more than only the climate. There are really different issues which are important. What are the sustainability challenges? And next, If we focus on the climate, that's about 50 gigatons a year we are emitting, and the blue line is what we are doing with current policies, so that's basically more or less flat. But what we really should do to be 2 degree consistent, or even 1.5, is really going down quite rapidly, which is not happening. So the gap is quite big, the gap between policy and what is needed to be 2 degree consistent, to go to the bottom. Then, in addition, it's not only about the environment, it's also about our social fabric of society, food security, adequate income, access to healthcare, water, energy, education, gender equality, political voice, the right to be involved if decisions are taken which affect you. And many people live below these social foundations. And you know the work of Kate Raworth, on which this is based. So the donut, let me explain this very shortly because most of you are familiar with it. So the green one is the safe and just space for humanity. If you fall below, you are below the social foundation. So, for example, no access to water or food, or no gender equality. And if you are above, then that are the ecological ceilings, like climate change and air pollution. So the real challenge is to stay in between. And in the book you will find some tables which gives the exact values where we should be. And as shown with the ecological ceilings, we have already passed quite a few boundaries. So there is work to be done. And then the United Nations has developed the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and there are quite a few of them. So no poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, and so on. Then we come to like energy, reduce inequalities. Number 12 is responsible consumption and production, very important. Climate action, life below water, life on land, peace and justice. And number 17 is that we need partnerships to work together to achieve these goals. So it is not only for the government or only for companies or only for citizens, but we have to work together. And then my next question to you is, I've listed the 17 SDGs, and which one is the most important, do you think? Is that number 8, to have good work and good wage, responsible consumption and production, climate action, or all equally important? Please cast your vote. I think most of you have now casted the vote, and it is becoming boring because the majority answer is all are equally important. And I think there is no right or wrong answer to this question, because in the end all goals are important, that's true, and we need to have a holistic view. We should be careful not to focus on one and forgetting about another one. If you, for example, only work on climate action but you forget about fresh water use or biodiversity, then you may miss out. So there are interconnections. And my main message for this question is that we really have to look holistic. And there's a tendency to just focus on 1 or 2 SDGs, but my main message is really look at the holistic way. And just to show how we can also make it operational, because these goals are very aspirational. So let me take number 8. That's about decent work and income. And we can translate that in a living wage. That's more or less a minimum wage depending on the conditions in the country. So a minimum wage in my country, I'm from the Netherlands, or anywhere else in Europe is a bit higher than a minimum wage in Southeast Asia or in Latin America. So what is the minimum you need to provide your family with the means to buy life's essentials? Okay, so if a company in its production chain would pay the living wage to the whole, everybody in the production chain, so even if you outsource to Asia or Africa part of production, then you can achieve quite a few of the other SDGs. So if you provide all the people in your production chain, in your value chain of the company, with a living wage, then people working for you would not live in poverty, have access to food, healthcare, and importantly also education. And there's no need for child labor because the father or mother would earn enough for a family. So what I want to show you is that for example, by just paying a living wage, which is easy to do, you can really help out quite a bit and achieve other SDGs in addition. The next slide is what I call the wedding cake, and you probably remember the wedding cake. And I adjusted the goals according to the level. So the biosphere is the Earth system, then society, and then finally the economy. And I'm trained as an economist and a lawyer, but then we always tend to think that the economy is at the center. But if you look at this wedding cake, you clearly see that the biosphere, of course, is an extremely important foundation. Next to it, society and economy is only coming at the end, and is not the most important one. And the reason why I make this picture is to slowly get you into my model. And then you have the next picture, which was designed by my daughter. So then I say the environment is E, society S, and then the economy, I'm doing finance, so let's call it the F, financial return and risk. And now the question is, what do we do? How do we rank these factors? And normally, if we come from traditional finance, we only look at the F. So, how can we look at these externalities? So I'm going too quick. So normally, what happens at the level in society and what happens in the environment is happening outside the company. So we call it externalities. So they are beyond our immediate reach as company. And then, what would an economist say? Okay, an externality, an external effect. So it is external, it is not priced, so sorry guys, I cannot do anything about it. That's what an economist would say. Then I introduced the human rights advocate to talk about the social externalities, and then this person would say, yeah, but ensuring every person's claim to life's essentials is really crucial. And that's where everything starts. And then if we introduce an ecologist, well, we need to operate within the planetary boundaries, because otherwise we cannot operate anymore. The planet is not livable anymore. So your perspective depends really from where you're looking. And as economists, and as finance people, we have the really okay, if it is not priced, if it is an external effect, it is for the government to deal with, and we cannot help. That is the typical reaction. And I would say then we really miss out on what we can do. So it is really important to integrate all three perspectives and then look at integrated value rather than at financial and social and environmental value separately. We need to integrate them. And in that sense, sustainable finance is really interdisciplinary. I had to learn a lot on the social and environmental aspects. I'm lucky at the business school where people are working on these other issues. So they introduced them to me, and we can do self-learning. I also encourage you to do that. So if certain elements are not clear from this presentation, please look for yourself, learn about it, and then try to integrate these perspectives. Okay, that's very nice, but then still the economists among you would say, okay, if it is not priced, how to do it? And I come to that in the next slide. So let's first give you the outline of the book. So the finance as usual, that's the first typology, is just shareholder value. And you've seen these movies like Wolf of Wall Street and so on. So we only care about the value for shareholders and we maximize F, financial value profit. That's it. A bit more recent trend is 1.0. Okay, let's treat our employees nicely. Let's care a little bit about the environment, a little bit about society. Otherwise, my company is not accepted anymore. And I would call that very minor social and environmental constraints. So you do them for an instrumental reason in order still to be able to make your profits. If we move to the second stage, stakeholder value, then you would say, okay, we have these three levels and all three are important. So I put plus signs, so I add them up. But what I really mean is we need to integrate these factors and then to look at what is the impact of my company on the financial side, but also on the social and environmental side. And I have to take an integrated decision. That's what we call stakeholder value. And then the final one, 3.0, is common good value. Then impact comes first, so social and environmental impact comes first. And then finance is only condition. You need to make profit to survive, but your purpose is to have social and or environmental impact. That is really the most important thing there. And then the question is, where are we today? We are today quite close to 1.0, to the shareholder value, a little bit towards 2.0. And we need the front runners at 3 to show us what can be done. And the real mass would be nice if that moves to 2.0. So if all business, all citizens and all governments would incorporate social and environmental dimension in addition to finance. So my next question is, this model is very nice, so we move to integrated value, or we even move to this common good. You remember this book of Jean Tirole, the Nobel Prize winner, the Common Good Economics. What is the biggest barrier? Is that the short-term thinking of finance, next quarter profit, or is it this shareholder value versus common good thinking? What is the biggest barrier for getting there? Really a close run. It almost looks like the Brexit vote, with a tiny difference. So really coming to an end. It's a wafer thin difference, so 51 shareholder value 49 short term. And yes, both are extremely big barriers. And the short-term thinking is really, because what you do today, you have the costs and the benefits are far in the future. Mark Carney has said it very often. But personally, I think that the shareholder value versus common good thinking is the biggest barrier, because with the first one you only look at profit, so you really discard social and environmental issues, and this common good, this public good, common good thinking, that's really the big challenge. Are we able to think beyond ourselves, beyond our own company, beyond our own financial institution, and try to achieve the common good? That is one of the biggest barriers. Thank you for your input. Okay. But then the question is, this is nice talk, we should do the right thing, we care about social and environmental externalities, but why would we do that? And then the first one is the economist answer. Okay, regulation, taxation is going to come. For example, carbon tax in the Netherlands, we're working on it. As economists, we're pushing the government towards a carbon tax. Some countries already have it, like Sweden. The second one is NGOs, like Greenpeace, the World Wildlife Fund. Consumer organizations are pushing for it. If you if you sell the wrong products, consumers don't buy anymore at your company. And the third one, and that's my favorite one, I discussed the Sustainable Development Goals. That's the transition agenda of the United Nations to achieve them by 2030. So that's in 11 years' time. And if we have the vision that some way we travel at least part of the distance towards a sustainable economy, that means no business as usual, so we really change our ways to one, some earlier, some later. Then if you want to survive in the future, doing nothing is no option, because then you will fade away. So if you want to future-proof your business, you better move, and then you have the option to be a first mover or to be a later mover. That's really about future-proofing your business. And the next thing is, how should we do it? And then the high-level expert group from the European Commission, they produced a report last year, and the Commission is now legislating their proposal. The first one is, if you're an investor, you have a fiduciary duty towards your clients, and then you have to include sustainability. And I think that's an excellent idea. So you show that you're responsible for your investments if you are the asset manager. The second thing is, they propose to make a taxonomy, what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. And I've tried to show that sustainability in the end about the company's preparedness for transition, even if you're not there today, what are your plans for the future? And I think that's extremely difficult to judge for officials. I've been Bank of England supervisor at the start of my career, and I can tell you from first-hand experience that officials are not always the first one to see new things happening because you're far removed from the real economy. And it's not to blame officials, but just a fact of life. So we propose really let the innovation come from the frontrunners in the market. And I will show you how we can do that. In finance, there is a really big swing towards passive investing. So you just follow the market index. And in our book, we take an extremely different approach. So we really we go away from traditional finance and say, okay, sustainability is about the long term, and then you want to invest in and talk with, engage with companies that really pursue this long-term sustainable value creation. That's your aim. To see that, you really have to check the company's business model, its strategy, what they are doing. And an ESG rating is too superficial to really embrace it, like credit ratings are a bit superficial, and we have seen during the crisis. So the aim of this analysis is to look at the social, environmental value in the company in addition to the financial value. So to really calculate, to assess the integrated value. And then the next thing from finance is you need to diversify your portfolio in the full market index. That's our theory. If you look at this graph, a standard deviation is the volatility, the risk of your portfolio. After 50 or 100 of shares, you have already reduced your standard deviation, and adding more shares is not making, is doing a lot to reduce risk. So you cannot reduce risk further. And if you really want to analyze these companies in detail, you can only do that of a few companies. So we suggest that you run smaller portfolios and then really select them and really engage with them in a deep way. So you get more concentrated portfolios. And then I'm slowly rounding up. So elements of sustainable investing are having a long horizon. It doesn't mean that you keep your shares forever. So if there is new information in the long term which you don't like, for example, the company is going to unsustainable practices, you're always free to sell, but you concentrate on the long term, but, on the long horizon. The next thing is you have a concentrated portfolio, you analyze the companies, in return you get the benefits, because if you engage with the companies on this information which you've gathered, then you can improve financial, social and environmental performance, all three. So you do effective engagement. And then finally, I just said a few times, this market thinking, the market benchmark, is really unhelpful, because then finance is passive, is not taking its allocation role. I argue for finance to make choices, and then we are interested not how you're doing relative to the benchmark, but what is your absolute outcome. And there are examples, I show them in the book, where these new frontrunners are working with a 5-year average target. And I see that I have to speed up. One but final slide. I talked about investment. Banking, we can do exactly the same. So we can look at the social and environmental factors of the company, for which we have a lending decision. They influence the credit worthiness, and we can do the same analysis. And then I show a few, like Westpac in Australia, they have deforestation in Indonesia, so they have a zero net deforestation policy. Rabobank, the big food and agri bank, they have minimum standards for farmers where they lend to. And I'm going to the final slide. So my message to you is, this is only an introduction, there's far more to say, but then I hope to encourage you to read more. And the main message is, go from the narrow financial thinking to the broader integrated value, so include S&E. And then, I'm a finance person after all. Finance is about anticipating things happening. If you see something happening in the future, you price them in today. And if you do that, we can accelerate transition.
Now we fully understand what means
sustainable
finance. We also understand how to use it as a tool to transform the society. And time is come to go to the next generation, the younger generation. here represented by Kinanya Pijl, finishing her PhD in our institute at EY, at the Law Department. Kinanya, we see how Dirk is framing the issue, but yourself, how do you see it?
Thank you, Jean-Michel, and thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts. There's nothing in what Dirk has just said that I fundamentally disagree with. So even though my slide, the slide that you have in front of you now, might seem that I fundamentally disagree with what Dirk is saying, in essence, I fully agree with what Dirk is saying, and I have read his book, and it's an excellent book that all students should include in their lessons and in their learning about finance. The one thing that I would like to discuss with you today is the approach that you can take towards addressing sustainable finance, and the prevalent way of talking about getting towards sustainability is using the market. So let the market work for sustainability. And I'd like to use my 10 minutes to reflect a little bit on this approach towards a more sustainable economy. Let's go. Yes. So a little bit about me. I'm a PhD researcher at the EY, and I study responsible banking. So I asked two questions. So how do commercial banks integrate social and environmental considerations in their bank lending practice? And how do regulators, supervisors, the market, civil society organizations, and consumers, so the full spectrum of actors, influence the capacity of banks to live up to their ambitions to operate socially and environmentally responsible? And I tried to do that after speaking to many bankers and central bankers and civil society organizations for a year. So let's first be clear about the problem, that we at least agree on the problem. So how I conceptualize the problem is the way in which we produce and consume goods and services is not sustainable. So we are first destroying the planet, as Dirk has set out, so the planetary boundaries. We are negatively impacting on people, the human rights of people, their health and safety. And one aspect that I think is not very prevalent or very clear in Dirk's book, which is the societal aspect. So indicating that our economic system creates inequality, exploits people. So the power dimension that is prevalent in the way we've designed our economy. But then today we're discussing the role of finance to do something about this. And Dirk has made this wonderful overview of finance as usual, how you transition to sustainable finance 1.0 to 2.0 and 3.0, and how in those 3 steps you go from maximizing profit to maximizing social and environmental impacts while taking profit into account, because you need to be a flourishing business to be able to do good for society. I agree fully on that, and it would be wonderful to get companies to move towards SF 3.0. But the thing that I would like to reflect on is a little bit on the vocabulary that is used in this market-based approach to get there. So the book speaks about internalizing externalities. So we're trying to integrate social and environmental considerations into the price of products. We're talking about maximizing integrated value. We want to measure impact, so things like carbon impact on people. We want to quantify this and monetize this. So we integrate it into a price because that's the vocabulary that we use to talk about the economy. And we do these based on stress tests. So we don't really know what's going to happen in the future, but we can come up with different scenarios and adapt our behavior based on the expected scenario. What else? I'm still talking about the vocabulary that mostly economists use to think about how we move to sustainability. So another way of thinking about it is, or not another way, we use the concept of material ESG issues. So it needs to matter for your firm. So which social, environmental, and governance aspects matter for your company? And the language that we use is the S means human capital, health and safety, management, culture. We're talking about the management of local stakeholders, social issues in the supply chain, brands, and trust. When we're talking about governance, we're talking about the governance of the company. So the ownership, management compensation, voting structures and rules, business ethics, and supervisory boards. I'd just like you to briefly reflect on this a little bit, because there are norms and values implicit in this way of talking about how we're going to move towards sustainability. For example, the concept of externalities. What is it external to? So we're still here talking about a company that pollutes, for example. So these externalities are external to that company, but not to the system, not to the community that is around the company that is polluting. So you're still thinking from this one position within a bigger whole. You're not adopting a systems approach by way of talking about externalities. The same about maximizing. We're still trying to compete on all these aspects. So we are individually maximizing our value. So we're not collaborating on an issue. We're choosing competition here to get to a certain outcome. We try to integrate this thinking in the way we have learned to think about it. So we're measuring it, quantifying it, monetizing it. Besides that, for example, the aspect of governance, we're talking about the governance of the company, but we're not talking about the people. So when a company has an impact on the communities around that company, do these people have a voice? Do these people want the dam that is being built in their environment? So you can think about governance also beyond the processes within a firm, and reflect on kind of the broader setup of governance of people, of all stakeholders involved. So what I'm simply trying to say is that the business case logic, or a market rationale, is like a pair of eyeglasses, a way of looking at the world and how we relate to one another. My question then is this way of pursuing sustainable development, is it part of the solution or part of the problem? I've set out 4 aspects here that I think is really difficult to capture if you try to transition towards sustainability through the lens of the market. So one question that is not being asked, for example, is what is the right thing to do? So we're thinking about how can we make it in our interest to do the right thing, but the question is not the more fundamental question of what do I ought to do, what should I do, what is the right thing to do? It's not necessarily about public deliberation. How can we balance and weigh social impacts, environmental impacts, and profit? Because it's quite easy to kind of brush over it briefly. But how do you weigh these interests? And who needs to be present in that debate to have all voices represented? Which also is part of the third point. The power element is not very prevalent in a market-based approach towards sustainability. So do the people who are impacted by companies, by finance, do they have a voice? Do they have something to say? Do they have the right to protest? And the last aspect here is the inherent value of nature. So we're talking about nature as a capital, as a commodity, as something that we use for human beings. But we disregard the inherent value of trees, of water, of nature, that cannot be translated to a price in the way we have learned to think about the economy. So as Albert Einstein would say it, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. I'd like to talk you through one different way of looking at this, just to indicate that you could approach it from a very different perspective. And this is an approach borrowed from the sustainability discourse, which is not very economics oriented, but there are, for example, master programs which educate based on this approach. of which the first one is efficiency. If you want to move towards sustainability, then produce the same but with lower resource consumption or CO2 emissions. A second step would be, an additional step, consistency. So you follow the example of nature, nothing is waste and everything is reused. A third aspect, and I think that the market rationality or the business case perspective that we discussed earlier is not able to capture, is consume and produce less. So we have to change our habits and behavior. So this third approach, this sufficiency approach, that means that individuals need to change their consumption habits and lifestyle. It means that companies need to design products with sufficiency values in mind, which is durability and repairability, for example. For society as a whole, we need to get to consensus about the way we want to live. So what are the essential commodities that we want to preserve? So then we get back to public deliberation. Is everybody around the table? And let's have a debate about these fundamental questions. So what sufficiency does is that there are new needs that are constantly created by technological developments and advertising because there is a business case for it. But aside from the ecological dimension, sufficiency also asks the question of whether a steady accumulation of the newest consumer goods and entertainment actually makes us happier. So sufficiency is not just about doing without, it's also about liberation. So this is just to indicate a different way in which you could also think about approaching the problem of sustainability. So my conclusion simply is, I agree with everything that Dirk says. I think it's a wonderful book. It's quite easy to read, and every student should read this as part of their education. So it's great to do this based on the market logic, but be vigilant of the sort of behavior and thinking that we normalize by the way we approach the transition towards sustainability. Thank you.
We have heard for Kinanya a complement and an alternative to Dirk. We will give 2 minutes to Dirk to react, and I invite all the audience, or 120 people, to ask us the questions or to make us the remarks they feel appropriate. Dirk, a quick reaction to this challenge.
Thank you. I really like the comments, because I fully agree that this moral dimension which you basically put in, and the one I like most is like the inherent value of nature. I mean, you can try to monetize it, but I always say it is not for sale, and we have to be careful as economists not almost doing that. And I really like this additional perspective. So with the business case, I try to get the thing going, but we should not forget about this more deeper questions. And in circular economy, the most fundamental one is all about redesign and reuse, but the most fundamental one is refuse a new product if you don't need it. And thanks for bringing that on the table, because that's where it all starts. Production is a consequence of consumption. So in the end, what we decide to buy is produced, and what we decide not to buy is not produced. So thanks for the additional vision on this, because it is really important. With the growing population, we really need to change our behavior, not only business, but also we as individuals, as consumers. So nice additional perspective.
Kinanya, convinced?
Yeah, definitely. And I also think kind of this is also almost a comment towards everybody who's in this conversation. So kind of it's almost a pointing the finger towards ourselves. So what is it that you can do? You 120 people in the room now. Are you doing the right things to move towards a more sustainable future?
Jean-Michel, because I know there are a lot of supervisors in the audience, and I've been one myself. And sustainable finance is really about trial and error. So companies try new things, financial institutions try new things, and I would really encourage the supervisors really to allow the financial sector to experiment. So if they go away from the market index and they go to more concentrated portfolios, don't always look first at the risk, but also be open for the opportunities. And that the sector needs to experiment with new ways of doing things, and that we should be careful to allow this experimentation. And the book is written in a quite accessible style, so not only for students but also for practitioners, really to help this new kind of thinking. And we should allow each other a bit to experiment and not see it as risk. I always hear the word risk, and I'm not as young as Kinanya, but I try to think of sustainable finance also as opportunities to move things forward.
First reaction from the audience, from Tattoo. Do you think that the EU's approach, taxonomy, is a good way to tackle the issue, or would it be better to classify companies rather than economic activities?
I can have a go. I think we should not classify us at all. I think investors, bankers, and also consumers, when they buy a mutual fund, we should do our own thinking. And there are different perspectives, and I think it's very difficult for officials to really classify. So don't over-classify. I know we are going to do it, but don't overdo it. It is a dynamic game.
Kinanya, any idea?
Yeah, I would agree on that. I would certainly not want to classify companies, so then you make the categories even broader, which doesn't really help. So it's good to, if you're classify the economic activity. But as I said earlier, it's about the deliberation, about having the conversation, about how you're weighing these interests. Because you're making a big move. You're saying we're going to potentially make less profit to do it very differently. But that's not how our society, how our economy is run. So for me, it's about having that conversation. How do we want to do this? Who do we want to be? And then making these categories doesn't really help, because then you're going to game the system to be able to be labeled green. So yeah, in that sense, I agree with Dirk.
Yeah, really. Next 2 feet question. On Earth. What should be the priority regulatory measures to be adopted to reorient the trillions of financial assets towards sustainable development? This is practical.
Okay.
Good question.
The first one is,
yeah.
And on that point, I really fully agree with Kinanya. We're all in this market thinking, and if things cannot be valued at market value at each second of the day, then we call it illiquid, and then we price it down. And a lot of sustainable projects, for example, land system change, so restore land which is degraded, that are long-term projects which are illiquid. And I would say, please, in regulation, don't put a discount on illiquid projects, and try if pension fund as a long-term investor is investing in illiquid, long-term sustainable project, don't be afraid of it, but just check what is happening, but don't put a discount on it. So try to go away from the market thinking that everything should be marketed and sold and bought at the same instant. So have a bit more patience.
Yeah, I think my comment, it's not necessarily one specific regulation, but it's the way we talk about risk. So if we would make the European Central Bank think differently about these risks, almost deciding that climate risks, social impacts, that these things matter, then it trickles down through the financial system. So it's almost kind of from like top down, making a very conscious choice that these risks matter. Back on Earth
again with Elisa, but Elisa is with quantifying. So one of the problems is to quantify how much a company is sustainable. Do you think that the ESG indicator available on data provider is enough?
No, not really. I think it's exactly the same as with credit ratings, and we have seen what happened with the blind trust in these Alt-A securities, the subprime mortgages, which got an AAA credit rating. You have to keep on thinking yourself, watching yourself. The ESG rating is a starting issue. It is biased towards the big companies, which has the manpower, the human power to publish a lot of sustainability policies. Smaller companies cannot do it, so there is a bias towards bigger companies who publish more information. So there are a lot of biases, and really you should think yourself when you make a sustainable investment, rather than the ratings cannot do the job for you.
Yeah, and I would add that I would want it not to be merged into one rating, so one number. So I would like to see the parameters of this is the financial performance, this is the social performance, and this is how the company performs environmentally.
Now, Alessandra is also 2 feet on earth. How central bank could align with sustainable finance and sustainable development goals?
Yeah, the interesting thing is, that's what the Dutch central bank did, is in Dutch, growth which is for the long term, they call it sustainable growth, so that means it is a stable, good growth, but it also means sustainable in the sense what we are talking about today. So the Dutch central bank took their mandate as being responsible for long-term sustainable growth, to say yes to sustainability, and there's now a network for greening the financial system. But then we get the bias Kinanya mentioned, that central bankers have a bias towards looking at risk. So on the financial stability side, they are very busy on sustainability to avoid climate risks, stress tests. On their own activities, monetary policy, they could green their own portfolio, but they refuse to do it. And I've just finished a paper, Greening Monetary Policy. That was quite exciting to do. And all mainstream central bankers refuse to do that. So I would encourage them to do like all the people in the seminar today. They're interested in the topic. So central bankers, if they want, they could quite easily align, and also in their own activities reflect on the first dimension of Kinanya, the moral thing, what is right, and it would be right to buy low carbon corporate bonds in their asset portfolio. So central banks could do it, and I encourage also to join us in moving forward on sustainable finance.
Yeah, and I would add that central banks, they generally say it's simply not within our mandate to act on this. And the mandate is financial stability, which is a very broad and difficult term. So I think we need to open up the debate about what does it mean that a central bank needs to guarantee financial stability? How should we interpret that? Does that include climate change? Does that include inequality in society? Because it is an independent institution, so we would want the public to be part of this debate to decide on the extent to which this is the role of a central bank.
Another issue that Dirk did touch already, but Camille is asking for more. Dirk, could you tell us more about the problems of ESG scores and rankings?
Yeah, well, there is a full chapter in the book, chapter 7, on this problem of ESG rating. So first of all, there is a problem of big companies report better because they have more people working on it. Companies publish their own information, so have the bias to publish the good news. We all of us are in the good news show. The correlation between different providers, if they measure the same, you would expect a correlation of 0.8 or 0.9. Reality is that the correlation between ESG factors of different providers is 0.26. Extremely low for something which should measure the same. And finally, sustainability is about the future. And my favorite one was the future-proofing your business model. While sustainability scores, ESGs, are measuring the past. What is your carbon footprint in the past? So dealing with the future and using measures from the past. And that's why finance is very bad in doing this, because we need new ways of thinking, scenario analysis, which you cannot put into ratings. But there's a full chapter on it to read more on all these shortcomings.
Young King, very practical also. Are there already any financial institution currently applying or developing the I equals F plus E plus S theory?
Let me give 2 examples, and then you can add a few. The first is Alecta, that is a Swedish pension fund, 80 billions. So they don't hire asset managers, they have a small team themselves, and they only invest in 100, not equities, but they call it companies. So they know what they're investing in, so in companies, and then they engage with these companies. So they measure their performance on a 5-year average. So this, what I talked about, sustainable investing, is done by them, and quite a few banks are doing it, and you have some ethical banks who already do SF 3.0, who are really impact bankers. So they first look whether the proposal is fitting with their purpose. For example, on farming, they first say, okay, we do biological farming, we don't do intensive agriculture. So they first check a borrowing proposal on that. And once it meets the impact criteria, only then they start to check, is the financial return sufficient to keep the operation going. So they first think about impact. So in the Netherlands it's called Triodos Bank. I think in Italy it's called Banca Etica. Yeah, and most countries have such banks. So it is happening on the ground. It's quite exciting.
Like Dirk, I find it a bit difficult because what you're describing in the question is the 2.0 version. So the 3.0 ones are easier to establish. So that's Triodos Bank, that's GLS in Germany, that's Banca Etica, who first care about social environmental impact and then the financial aspect of it. But the financial aspect matters too, right? Because you need to make money to be able to keep doing good. But if I think about a bank that tries to do the F plus E plus S, banks that come to mind are, for example, Rabobank is doing quite a good job. But other banks are development banks, which is not really a fair game, perhaps. But they need to be sustainable too, in the sense of they make money as well. But it's not necessarily fair in the sense that they have the public government behind them, backing them up when it doesn't go
This is
well.
really also practical. But tell me, what's the value of ESG factors in issuing independent rating ratings? And how financial markets could be impacting in the long run? Because what we did hear from ESG is a little bit superficial.
Yeah, but that's really digging into looking at the companies itself. What are their plans, looking at their reports. And we did, for example, a case study on Philips. Philips used to be lighting, is now doing healthcare. And one of their aims is, for example, to provide healthcare for 3 billion people, including not only in the West, but also in Africa. And if you read the report, they first of all applied integrated value thinking, and so we cannot read sustainability in the market. There's only the financial side in the market values. So you really have to think, to check on the companies. And at school we learn the students efficient markets, so all the information is in prices. I think that's wrong for sustainability. We call it adaptive markets. That's Andrew Lowe of MIT. So the more people, like people in the seminar today, will look at social and environmental issues, the more we look at them, we incorporate in our decisions, the more they will come into prices. Only then markets might become useful, but at the moment the markets are a bit behind because they don't look at these issues. So the markets cannot tell you a lot.
And it might be a bit easy to fall over this because, yes, it's fair to be critical about the information level that is available when it comes to ESG ratings, but still there are organizations specialized in this that do very thorough research. So there's a sort of constant low level of information available, but this is the best we have now, and so it's at least based on the same baseline of information. So it's equally bad, but still it's all we have. So let's collectively work on improving the information available. And it's an indication about a firm. I would do further research after you've seen the rating of a certain company.
Going to the end from Henning. Very interesting. Oh, no, sorry, so we did do already. From Sophia. Very interesting, but totally new for me. By the way, is there a body for supervision of sustainability at European level or international level, a kind of supreme audit institution?
I can
question.
Everybody has his own supreme body and his own brain, so I think we all have to learn it ourselves. I was quite lucky by having colleagues who introduced me to the environmental issues, to the social issues. By giving me new literature, I learned it myself, and then I talked to a lot of people, and I would really encourage you to do the same, because in the end, the key issue is we try to change behavior, our own behavior, for example, of consumption, and that's really about feeling these issues. So you have to make your own choice to do your own thinking. And the good news is there is now a network for greening the financial system where central banks and prudential supervisors are collecting information, doing conferences. So there is quite a bit going on. So there are conferences on these issues. The European Commission is quite active. So things are happening. But please, I really encourage you to do your own thinking, your own research, because then you really appreciate what it is about, so that you have the liberty, the liberation, to make your own choices here, rather than to follow others. So because once you know a bit more about it, then it also gets more exciting.
Would you oppose to liberty?
Well, I oppose to the idea, I'm not in favor of the idea of having a separate body that would be in charge of sustainable finance, sustainable development, for the simple reason that it is our collective responsibility. So it's us as individuals, us as consumers, as citizens who voice their concerns. It's the central bank, so the regulator, the supervisor, companies, banks, it's all of us collectively deciding based on which grounds you buy a certain product, you do a certain thing. So it's easy to allocate a body with this responsibility, but that is not really having the effect that we're looking for, because we want us all to reflect on what we do.
And now the last one from Atir, it just disappeared, but it will come back. From Atir, by the way, today, existing companies, do they value the interruption of the service when they are bringing untested sustainable solution in the market? And does this impact the cost of investment? That's the last one.
Yeah.
I feel you breathing, Kinanya. Dirk, do you want to jump in?
Let's first of all, let's not be afraid. So trial and error is part of all new things. So I have my textbook out on sustainable finance, and I'm really happy to get comments so I can improve it later on. And that's the same for companies. Try new things, and don't be afraid. You may sometimes miss it, but if you don't try, we don't make any progress. So I'm not so afraid for trying new ways of doing it. Sometimes it may go wrong, and sometimes we find good solutions and we can move forward on a larger scale. So I would not see it as a problem, but really try new things and see how we can improve, and have a bit of patience, that you take a bit of time to judge whether something is working or not.
Kinanya?
And I think a bit of a buzzword here is also partnerships. So yes, you're taking a risk, but partner up with private, public, or other actors. Share the risk so that you can collectively carry the burden of indeed taking such risks.
Dirk, Kinanya, I did learn a lot because really I was knowing too little. I'm very interested into the topic, and I understand how crucial it is for us, for the world, all the parts of the world, and for us, the Westerners, because we have, let's say, a bit more responsibilities in the way we transform Earth, the planet, and the economy this past century.
It was a very active and very discussion, I found. So thanks to all of you, our speakers, our moderator, and our participants for your time, dedication, and for the comments and questions. I think there were a few informative questions also on the political process on this, which so I invite you to have a look at the chat box. So our next online seminar will be on the 13th of April on digital money. We'll start in a couple, so stay tuned and mark your diary. And for now, thanks for watching. Have a great day here in Florence and in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Bye.